Well, Casey, last week on this show, we had a conversation with Daniel Cocatello from the AI Futures Project about his new manifesto, AI 2027, and we got a lot of feedback on it.
Yeah, in fact, one of my friends messaged me and said, that was a real bummer.
Yes, and so much to our surprise, there was a new manifesto on the block this week. This one was much more skeptical of the sort of fast takeoff scenario that Daniel and his co-authors suggested. It was written by two computer scientists at Princeton, and it is called AI as Normal Technology.
Yeah, and this really arrived at the right time for us, I think, Kevin, because for weeks, if not months now, listeners have been writing in saying, hey, we love hearing you guys talk about AI, but we would really appreciate a slightly more skeptical take on all of this. Somebody who has not bought all the way into the idea that society is going to be completely transformed by 2028. And so when you and I read this piece from Arvind and SFJAZZ, we thought this might be the thing that our listeners have been looking for.
Yes. So this piece was written by Arvind Narayanan, who's a professor of computer science at Princeton, and his co-author, Sayash Kapoor. And in this piece, Arvind and SFJAZZ really lay out what they call an alternative vision of AI, basically one that treats AI not as some like looming superintelligence that's going to go rogue and take over for humanity, but as a type of technology like any other, like electricity, like the internet, like the PC, things that take a period of years or even decades to fully diffuse throughout society.
Yeah, they go through step by step. What are the conditions inside organizations that prevent technology from spreading at a faster pace? Why is that same dynamic likely to unfold here? And what does it mean that AI might not arrive in a super intelligent form for decades instead of just a few months?
Totally. And this is a very different view than we hear from the big AI labs in Silicon Valley. A lot of the people we've talked to on this show believe in something more like a fast takeoff, where you do start to get these recursively self-improving AI agents that can just sort of build better and better AI systems. And Arvind and SFJAZZ really say, hold on a minute, that's not how any of this works.
And Kevin, something that I really appreciate about this work is that Arvind and SFJAZZ are not the sort of skeptics who say that AI is all hype, that it isn't powerful, that you can't do cool things with it today. They also don't think that its capabilities are going to stop improving anytime soon. These are not people who are in the sort of deep learning is hitting a wall camp. They think it's going to get more powerful. They just think that the implications of that are much different than those who have been suggested. So to me, it seems like a much smarter, more nuanced kind of AI skepticism than the sort that I sometimes see online.
So to make his case that AI is a normal technology and not some crazy superintelligence in the making, let's bring in Arvind. Arvind Narayanan, welcome to Hard Fork.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Great to chat with you after so many years of reading your writing.
Well, let's start with the central thesis of this new piece that you and Sayash Kapoor wrote together. There's a lot in it. It's very long, and we'll take time to unpack some of the different claims that you all make. But one of the core arguments you make is that AI progress or the sort of fast takeoff scenario that some folks, including former guests of this show, have envisioned is not going to happen because it's going to be bottlenecked by this slower process of diffusion. Basically, even if the labs are out there inventing these AI models that can do all kinds of amazing and useful things, people and institutions are slower to change, and so we won't really see much dramatic transformation in the coming years. But to me, AI diffusion actually seems very fast by historical standards. ChatGPT is not even 3 years old. It has something like 500 million users. Something like 40% of US adults use generative AI, which didn't really exist even a few years ago. That just seems much faster to me than the proliferation of earlier technologies that you've written about. So how do you square the growing popularity and widespread usage of these apps with the claim that it just is going to take a long time for this stuff to diffuse throughout society?
So I'm going to make a crazy sounding claim, but hear me out. Our view is that it actually doesn't seem like technology adoption is getting faster. So we're well aware of that claim about 40% of US adults using generative AI. We discussed that paper in our essay, and I have no qualms with their methodology or numbers or whatever. But the way it's been interpreted is it's only looking at the number of users without looking at the distinction between someone who's heavily using it and relying on it for work versus someone, who used ChatGPT once a week to generate a limerick or something like that. So the paper, to the author's credit, does get into this notion of intensity of use. And when they look at that, it's something on the order of 1 hour per work week. And it translates to a fraction of a percentage point in productivity. And that is actually not faster than PC adoption, for instance, going back 40 years.
Yeah. I know you are not specifically responding with this piece to any other piece that's come out, but I just can't help but thinking about our conversation that we had last week with Daniel Cocatello of the AI Futures Project, who has just spent the past year putting together this scenario of what he thinks the world will look like over the next few years. And part of his thesis is that we'll start to have these sort of autonomous coding agents that'll automate the work of AI research and development and will essentially speed up the iteration loop for creating more and more powerful AI systems. I'm curious what you make of that thesis and where you think it breaks down. Is it that you don't think that the systems will ever become that good and capable of that kind of recursive self-improvement, or is it that you think that will happen, but it just won't matter much because coding is only one type of job and one type of occupation, and we've got all these other ones? Like, where is the hole in that scenario?
Sure. Yeah, this is a lot of part 2 of our paper is devoted to this issue. And there's an interesting linguistic choice, I think, that you made. You alternatively refer to them as highly capable and highly powerful AI systems. For us, those two are not just not equivalent, they are actually very different from each other. We don't dispute, we completely agree with Dan, that improving AI capabilities is already rapid and could be further accelerated with the use of AI itself for AI development. For us, that does not mean that these AI systems will become more powerful. Power is not just a property of the AI system itself. It's a property both of the AI system and the environment in which it is deployed. And that environment is something that we control, and we think we can choose to make it so that we're not rapidly handing over increasing amounts of control and autonomy to these AI systems, and therefore not make them more powerful. Now, there's an obvious counter-argument that these things will make you so much more efficient that people will have no choice but to do so. We disagree. We have a lot of analysis in the paper for why it's actually just not going to make business sense in most cases to deploy AI systems in uncontrolled fashions compared to the benefits that it will bring.
It might be worth, pausing a bit and saying a bit more of the argument you make for why that is. What are some of the sort of natural breaks that you see happening in organizations that prevent technology from spreading faster than it does today?
This is where we think we can learn a lot from past technologies. When we look at the history of automobiles, for instance, for the first several decades, vehicle safety was not even considered a responsibility of manufacturers. It was entirely on the user. And then there was a mindset shift, right? And once safety began to be seen as a responsibility of manufacturers, it no longer made business sense for them to develop cars with very poor safety engineering, because whenever those cars caused accidents, there would be a negative PR consequence for the car company. So this mindset shift realigned incentives so that safety becomes part of what the manufacturer here is competing on. And that kind of mindset shift, I think, is important for AI, and that is something we can credit the AI safety movement with. Safety is, so indelibly associated with AI in most people's minds, so that's a good thing. So that's the first thing. Second, once you're in the situation where the negative safety consequences are easily attributable to the party who's responsible for it, you can have regulation that sets a standard that's going to be much more feasible than a scenario where something bad happens and there's no way to attribute it to who is the responsible party for it. So those are things we should be working on, right? How to make responsibility clearer, who's responsible for what. But those are things we can do And if we get those things right, I don't think it's the case that companies will be forced to deploy AI in unsupervised, uncontrolled manner.
You make a really instructive example in your paper about the difference between Waymo and Cruise, two self-driving car companies, one of which has a very strong safety record, Waymo, the other of which had like a high-profile incident in San Francisco and was forced to pull its robo-taxis out of the city and essentially shut down, which was Cruise. And you sort of extend that to the logic of AI more generally, where you say the companies that have the safe products will sort of outcompete the companies with the unsafe products in the market. And I would love to believe that there is sort of a self-correcting mechanism in the market that will filter out all the unsafe products. But what I observe is that sometimes as the technology is getting more capable, the safety standards are actually moving in the other direction. So just a few days ago, the FT reported that OpenAI is now giving its safety testers less time and fewer resources than it used to before releasing their models, in part because the pressure to get these models out the door and stay ahead of their competition has become so intense. So I guess, given the safety sort of standards that we're seeing now in the industry, what makes you confident that the market will sort of take care of these safety concerns before these unsafe products are put into people's hands?
I'm not confident, and that's not something we say in the paper. We don't use the term self-correcting. We don't think markets will self-correct. It will take constant work, I think, from society, and obviously journalism plays a big role here, and regulators. We don't try to minimize the role for regulation either. And yes, what we're seeing with some of the safety windows decreasing is a problem. Definitely with you on that. But I think that is something that we have the agency to change. The fact that safety testing happens at all before models are released, that is something very different with AI than with past technologies. That is something we accomplished together, the AI safety community and everyone else who had a stake in this, to make this the expected practice for companies. And yes, it's true that recently things have been trending in a negative direction. It's important to change that. One last thing I want to say is that while I agree with Kevin's concerns, it's not maybe quite as concerning to me as some people would see it, because for us, a lot of the safety concerns come from the deployment phase as opposed to the development phase. And so while yes, there is a big responsibility for model developers, a lot of the responsibility has to be shared by deployers so that we have defense in depth. We have multiple parties who are responsible for ensuring good safety outcomes. And I think right now, the balance of attention is too much on the developers, too little on the deployers, and I think that should change.
Let's talk about another aspect of safety, which is the idea of alignment, right? This idea in AI development that we should build systems that adhere to human values, and that if we don't do that, there's some potential that eventually they will go rogue and wreak havoc. You are very skeptical about the current approach to model alignment. Why is that?
Sure. So here's kind of the causal chain that AI systems will become more and more capable. And recall that gap between capability and power. As a result of being more and more capable, they will become more and more powerful. And that distinction has been elided in a lot of the alignment literature. And once you have these super powerful systems, we have to ensure that they're aligned with human values. Otherwise, they're going to be in control of whole economies or critical infrastructure or whatever. And if they're not aligned, they can go rogue and they can have catastrophic consequences for humanity. Our point is that if you even get to the stage where alignment becomes super important, you've already lost. So in a sense, we want a stricter safety standard in a way than a lot of the alignment folks do. We don't think one should get to the superpower stage. And if you get to that stage, then tinkering with these technical aspects of AI systems is a fool's errand. It's just not going to work. Where we need to put the brakes is between those increases in capabilities and saying, AI is doing better than humans now. We don't need human supervision. We're going to put AI in charge of all these things. And that is something where we do think we can exercise agency. Again, that's a prediction. We can't be 100% confident of that. We outline in detail in the paper why we think we can do that, but certainly it remains to be seen.
I just want to make sure I understand the claim, because right now the leading AI labs are all trying to give their models more agency, more autonomy, to allow them to do longer sequences of tasks without requiring a human to intervene. Their goal, many of them, is to build these sort of fully autonomous drop-in remote workers that you could hire at your company and tell them to go do something and then come back a month later and it's done, or a week later. Are you saying that that is technologically impossible or implausible, or are you just saying that it's a bad idea and we should stop these companies from giving their models more autonomy without human intervention?
So it's a bit of both. We're not saying it's technologically impossible, but we think the timelines are going to be much, much longer than the AI developers are claiming. To be clear, I agree with you, Kevin. You wrote recently in your Feel the AGI piece that within perhaps a couple of years, AI companies are going to start declaring that they have built AGI. However, we don't think what they're going to choose to call AGI based on their pronouncements so far is the kind of AI that will actually be able to replace human workers across a whole spectrum of tasks in a meaningful way. So first of all, our claim is that it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a feedback loop of learning from experience in real world contexts to get to actual drop-in replacements for human workers, if you will. But our second claim is that even if and when that is achieved, for companies to put that out there with no supervision would be a very bad idea. We do think there are market incentives against that, but there also needs to be regulation. One example of something that we suggest is, for instance, the idea of AI owning wealth. That is one way in which AI could accumulate more power and control. Those are all avenues that we have of simple interventions, simply banning AI owning wealth, for instance, that will ensure that humans are forced to be in the loop, forced to be in control at critical stages of the deployment of AI systems.
Yeah, we simply must not give ChatGPT an allowance. I will not hear of it in this house. Now, you brought up, Arvind, Kevin's recent piece in which he argued that AGI is imminent. How wrong did you think that piece was?
First of all, I agreed with him that companies are going to declare this AGI. And I also agree with Kevin that, some people at least are not paying as much attention to this as they maybe should. With all that said, there's also an information asymmetry from the other side. A lot of the time when AI developers claim that AI can replace this or that job, they're doing so with a very narrow conception of what that job actually involves. And the domain experts in that job have a much better idea. So a lot of the time, ignoring AI, I do think, is rational. So there is a gap in both directions. And what I wish for is better mutual understanding, right? Better understanding from the public of where AI capabilities currently are, but also better understanding from AI developers of the real knowledge that everyday people have of their various different contexts through which they can learn what the actual limitations of AI systems are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the themes that you get at in the paper is that this focus on catastrophic risk that the AI safety community often emphasizes sort of risks taking the focus off of nearer term risks. But those risks, as you describe them, include the entrenchment of bias and discrimination, massive job loss, increasing inequality, concentration of power, democratic backsliding, mass surveillance. And I guess I'm just really struck that, even you as somebody who has really been leading the charge saying that a lot of this AI stuff is overhyped are also saying, my God, look at these terrible risks that are baked into the potential of these systems.
Just one small clarification. Yeah. We do think that some of the interventions targeted against superintelligence risks could actually worsen these other kinds of risks that we care more about. We're not making a distraction argument. That's a very specific argument that I've made in the past on Twitter, but not in any of my more formal writing. I don't make that argument anymore. We can certainly worry about multiple kinds of risks, but our real concern is that if we're so worried about superintelligence that we decide that the answer to it is a world authoritarian government, then that is going to worsen all of these other risks. And yes, so look, I mean, the second sentence of the paper is normal technology isn't meant to underplay this. Even electricity and the internet are normal technologies in our conception. And when we look at the past, the history of general purpose technologies, there have always been periods of societal destabilization as a result of their a rapid, as you could call it, even decades long in our view, is kind of rapid deployment, and it's hard for societies to adjust. Most famously, the Industrial Revolution led to a mass migration of workers to cities where they lived in crowded tenements. Worker safety was horrendous. There was so much child labor. And it was as a result of those horrors that the modern labor movement came about, right? And so eventually the Industrial Revolution lifted living standards for everybody, but not in the first few decades. All of that is very plausible with AI. We're not necessarily saying that that would happen, but I do think those are the kinds of things we should be thinking about and trying to forestall.
Let me move to an area where I think I really do disagree with you, but I want to see if I can understand your argument a little bit better.
Sure.
So you write about the idea of arms races in this piece. And one of the things you say is that there is no straightforward reason to expect arms races between countries over AI. You also say in the piece that you want to exclude from the discussion anything about the military. But I didn't understand this because to me, the military is typically the source of the arms race. And as these systems gain more capabilities, it is going to lead, the United States and its adversaries to try to build systems faster, more capably, possibly less safely, in hopes of getting one over on their adversary. So help me understand what you are arguing about arms races and why you're leaving the military out of it.
Yeah, so to be clear, when we say we exclude the military, we're just straightforwardly admitting that that could be an Achilles heel of the whole framework, and it is something we're researching. We don't think that military arms races are likely, but it's not yet something we understand well enough to confidently put into the paper. We're going to be exploring that in follow-up. So that's what we mean by excluding military AI. But even outside the military, there are lots of arms races that have been proposed, right? So for instance, one way in which this has been envisioned is, let's say, our court system or any other important application of decision making. Maybe countries will find that it's just so much more efficient and effective, let's say, to put AI in charge of making all decisions about criminal justice. So that's a kind of metaphorical arms race you can imagine, where there is a push to develop more and more powerful AI systems with less and less oversight. So it is that particular concern we're responding to. And our point of view there is, first of all, like, this is not the kind of thing at which you can perform at a superhuman level. The limitations are inherent and not related to computational capabilities. And even if it is, somewhat more efficient, you can save paying for the judiciary, for instance. I think the consequences for civil liberties, etc., are going to be domestically felt, and therefore the local citizens will rise up and protest against those kinds of irresponsible AI deployments. So it doesn't matter if it gives you an advantage against another country in some abstract sense. It is not something that people will accept or should accept.
Yeah, I find that such an interesting argument and provocative, because it also just, it really flies against some of my priors here, which are that there are actually powerful market forces and demand forces pushing people toward less restricted models. I observe that in some of the most recent models they've released, OpenAI has sort of relaxed some of the rules around what you can generate, generate images of public figures. They're reportedly exploring more erotic role play that you can use their models for. There does seem to be this market force, at least in the US, that is pushing people toward these less restricted uses of the AI models.
Or how about, Kevin, when you went to the Paris AI Action Summit, which sort of had its roots in the idea of building safer AI, but you got there and it was basically a trade show, right? And it was the French government saying, hey, don't count France out of the AI race, here we come, right? So to me, I feel like we're sort of already seeing this competitive dynamic play out.
Yeah, but I want to see what that looks like from your perspective, Arvind, because I think, my perspective is that we are already in something of an arms race. We have these export controls. We have people at the highest levels of government in both the United States and China saying that this is like a definitive conflict of the next few decades. So what in your mind lowers the stakes here, or lowers the temperatures, or takes us out of the category of an arms race?
So this is one of the other big ideas in the paper. We're borrowing this from political scientist Jeffrey Ding, and we're adapting it a little bit. And his big idea is that geopolitical advantage comes less from the innovation in technology and more from the diffusion of that technology throughout the economy, the public sector, throughout productive sectors. And he says that America's advantage over China right now is not primarily because of our capacity to out-innovate. Innovations travel between countries very easily, and we've seen that over and over. And in any case, the innovation advantage in AI is like a few months at best. The real advantage is in diffusion. Diffusion, again, being the bottleneck step that takes several decades. And that's where the advantage really is. So we agree, and we talk about the implications of that, but we're saying that the same thing also applies to risks. The risks for us are key not to the development of capabilities, but to the decision to put those models into consequential decision-making systems. And while it is true that there is an arms race going on in development, we're not seeing an arms race in the consequential deployment of these AI systems. And just to make that point very concrete, Kevin, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here. I do think to be clear, I do think it's bad if model developers skip safety testing altogether. But indulge me in this thought experiment. Let's say model developers start releasing models with absolutely no safeguards, whatever. So what? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, what do you think happens next, Kevin?
I mean, the classic answer from the perspective of an AI safety person would be that a very bad person or group gets their hands on a model that is unrestricted and uses it to, say, create a novel pathogen or a bioweapon.
They can do that today. We have state-of-the-art models that have been released with open weights, and sure, they might have some safeguards, but those are actually trivial to disable, so that capability exists today. I think if that were the thing that's going to lead to catastrophe, we would all be dead already. And that's a risk that existed even before AI. A lot of the ways in which AI can help create pathogens is based on information that's also available on the internet, so this is something we should have been acting on all along, and we have been finding other ways to decrease that risk. One could argue that maybe those steps are not enough, but it is hard for me to see this as an AI problem as opposed to just an existing civilizational risk.
I find that a bit glib. It makes me think of the debate over deepfakes and synthetic media. Like, it was always true, I shouldn't say always, but for the past, 30 years, it's been true that you could take a photo of me and manipulate it into some like non-consensual nude image of myself, right? The capability exists, and until recently it hasn't even been legal to do that in most places, but now you can do it instantaneously, right? And so part of the danger of AI is not does the capability exist, it is sort of how easy does it make the bad thing. And my guess is that what Kevin is worried about is that a future sort of open weights model is going to make it much easier for somebody to make a novel pathogen than the current state of the art, where you have to use the Google search engine, which famously has been getting worse for some time now.
So, let me, if I may, quickly respond to that. So I completely agree with you on the deepfakes concern, and I want to come back to that, especially the notification. Every time we're asked about, what we actually worry about with AI, that's absolutely at the top of our list. And I think the way in which policymakers have been so slow to react to that has been shameful. I'll come back to that in a second. But where I disagree with you is that as a model for how we should think about biorisk, because with the notification apps, friction matters a lot. If you decrease the friction, if you make it a little bit easier to access these apps, these high school kids are going to use them, and it's been an epidemic of hundreds of thousands of these kids using it, and it's a real problem. It's a huge problem. Biorisk is not like that. It's not something that a bored teenager does. That's something, where someone's trying to destroy the world or whatever. For that kind of adversary, the friction is irrelevant. If they're actually so keen on getting to that outcome, if it takes 3 extra clicks to get to something, that's not going to stop them, right? So these are, for us, 2 very different kinds of risks. For deepfakes, we do think we should be putting more frictions in place. Simple things like disallowing these apps on the App Store, not allowing social media companies to profit off of advertisements for these apps. These are all things that it boggles my mind that we have not done yet.
One of the things that I think was so useful about the scenario that Daniel Coccatello and his coworkers sketched out in AI 2027 is that it just made it very vivid and visceral for people to try to imagine what the near future could look like if they're right. Now, obviously, people will have many disagreements or quibbles with specific things that they project, but it was at least a scenario. I'm wondering if you could paint a picture for us of what the world of AI as normal technology will look like a few years from now. Obviously, you don't think that AI capabilities have hit a wall, so we will continue to get some new AI capabilities. Those capabilities will not be diffused throughout society. But like, what does the world look like in 2027 to you?
I mean, for me, it's a longer time scale, right? Maybe I'll talk about the world, 10 or 20 years from now. The world of 2027 for us is still pretty much the world we're in today. The capabilities will have increased a little bit, and the work hours of people using AI are going to have increased from, 3 hours per week to 5 hours per week or something like that. I might be off with the numbers, but I think qualitatively the world is not going to be different. But, a decade or two from now, I do think qualitatively the world will be different, and this is still work in progress in our minds. We'll expand it in the book version of this paper. But one of the things we do say is that the nature of cognitive jobs is going to change dramatically. And we draw an analogy to the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, most jobs were manual, and eventually most manual jobs got automated. In fact, back then, a lot of what we do wouldn't even have seemed like work. Work meant physical labor. That was the definition of work, right? So the definition of work fundamentally changed at one point in time. We do think the definition of work is going to fundamentally change again. We do think there will come a point where, just in terms of capabilities, not power, AI systems will be capable of doing, or at least mediating, a lot of the cognitive work that we do today. And because we think it's so important that we don't hand over power to these AI systems, and because we think people and companies will recognize that, a lot of what it means to do a job will be supervising those AI systems. It takes a surprising amount of effort, I think, to communicate what we want out of a particular task or a project to, let's say, a human contractor. And we think that the same thing is going to happen with AI. So a lot of what's involved in jobs is just specifying the task. And a lot of what is going to be involved is monitoring of AI and ensuring that it's not running amok. So that's one kind of prediction that we make. That's, of course, far from a complete description. But I think that's already radical enough. So I'll stop there.
I think that a casual observer of your work in AI snake oil and in this new piece about how AI is normal technology could come away from your work with the impression that they don't have to think about AI because it's overhyped, it can't actually do anything, and it's not going to arrive anytime soon in your life. And I know that that is not what you're saying because I have read your papers, but I think that is a view that many people have about AI right now, is that it's just kind of being hyped up by the sort of, circus masters of Silicon Valley, and it's all smoke and mirrors. And if you really dig, an inch below the official announcements, what you find is that it's all fake and people don't have to worry about it. And I just kind of wonder how it feels to be an AI skeptic in a landscape like that, because I worry that these stories that we're telling people about AI being overhyped and not all that powerful are actually lulling them into a false sense of security. I was recently reading an article from Scientific American that they published in 1940 called "Don't Worry, It Can't Happen," which was all about how the leading physicists and scientists of the day had looked into this question of, could you do nuclear fission? Could you split the atom? Could you make an atomic bomb? And had basically concluded that this was impossible and literally told readers that they should not be losing any sleep over this possibility.
Did Gary Marcus write that?
I don't think he was born yet.
Oh, okay.
But this was sort of the scientific consensus of the people outside the Manhattan Project and similar efforts, was that this was just impossible. And as a result, I think people were afraid and scared and surprised when it emerged that we actually did have atomic bombs in the making. And I worry about something similar happening with AI today, where we are just telling people over and over again, like, you don't have to think about this, you don't have to worry about it, it's not of immediate importance to you. And I think if it does show up in people's lives in a way that is shocking or unpleasant, I just worry that they're going to be more surprised than they need to be. Do you worry at all about that?
So there's so many things to unpack there. I think I've been surprised by how often people have opinions about my work having only read the title, not even the subtitle of my book. The subtitle of AI Snake Oil is what AI can do, what it can't, and how to tell the difference. The point is not all AI is useless, and just the amount of hate mail I've gotten where people don't recognize this is interesting. But I guess that's what the internet does, and I think part of it is there are these two narratives, right? That there's the utopia narrative and there's the dystopia narrative, and the it's all hype, there's nothing to see here narrative, and it's so tempting to box people into one of those narratives, and we don't fit into any of those. I think neither me nor my co-author SFJAZZ Kapoor. And it's interesting, being on social media, seeing the amount of audience capture. When I write something skeptical of AI, it gets 10 times or 100 times more engagement than when I write something pointing out improvements in AI capabilities, for instance. So there's a strong pull. And look, I'm doing what I can, which is not succumb to that audience capture and not give people only the one half of the story that they want to hear. But it's just a structural problem with our information environment for which I can't, as an individual, I think, be responsible. At the same time, let me also say that I think part of the blame here has to lie with the hype, because these products are being hyped up so much that when people believe the hype for a bit and try things out and they find that it's not what it's been hyped up to be, it's just very tempting to flip all the way to the other side of things. So yeah, I mean, I wish for a more productive discourse, but I think that's a shared responsibility for all of us, including the companies who are really setting the direction of the discourse.
All right. Arvind, thank you so much.
Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you for being a good sport.
Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.